from product to the service mode. Okay, it on paper you can basically say that it's a glorified trend towards leasing. What is the difference between buying a product and leasing a product? When I buy a product, I basically own the right to use the product day in and day out over the lifetime of the product. Versus with leasing, I only use the product if and when I need it. The sharing economy, the XAS, everything as a service, all these are examples of this move from using the product as an ownership model to a transfer of ownership where the manufacturer, the provider, owns the product and the customer just uses the product as and when they want to. It sounds trivial, it's actually not. The move towards servitization. If I take a look at most computing services today, okay, the move is getting more and more evident. I mean, you used to own your computer, you used to have all your data on your computer, you used to have your software on your computer. Nowadays, that move towards software as a service is getting to the point where in the next 6 to 7 years, my prediction is that Microsoft Office will not be available on your own computer anymore. It will be available only on the cloud. I understand a lot of softwares are already available only on the cloud. CRM software from Salesforce, that was the first effort, of course. But we see an increasing trend, not just in services, but in products as well. If you take a look at automobiles, the sharing economy has made a significant dent in the automotive sector. When we get to driverless cars and so on, we will see that this trend actually enhances it. So these are the four broad trends that I would like to talk about. Let me jump into these trends. Where do we stand today? Different companies have made different efforts. I mean, of course, it's not sort of ubiquitously true that the lean management, the lean supply chain is the basic supply chain of today. But very broadly, the concept of lean is that I eliminate waste. I match supply and demand. So currently, what we are trying to do in supply chain management in most countries in the world, in most companies in the world, is we want to make sure that every customer demand is met, and we want to make sure that we have nothing excess in terms of inventory left over. So this concept of lean, where I try to match supply and demand exactly, is what most chief supply chain officers will say they aspire to. They want to make sure that there is no wastage. Of course, this came from Toyota. So if I take a look at Tesla, they have a lot of backlog, a lot of excess demand, which they have booked. So what they are trying to do is ramp up production to meet that demand. So when your demand is very high and your supply is lower, in that case, you will have shortages. You'll have to sort of ramp up your production. The problem for Tesla is that suppose they ramp up production and then demand drops, then they have a lot of excess capacity which they will not be able to use. So lean management does pose its own set of challenges. On the other side of the divide, you have a lot of companies that have obsolete inventory, which have huge inventory write-offs, excess stock, and so on. So broadly, at your level, most of you will basically, when you exhort your employees to do better supply chain management, your most obvious slogan will be zero waste. Try and make sure that we match supply and demand perfectly, which is a good model for the current time. Why does this change in the future? It changes because, first of all, this notion of matching supply and demand, this notion of using make to stock as a system is getting replaced, whether you like it or not. Okay, make to order was the system that we had 100 years ago. 100 years ago, with craftsman's production, everything was made to order. The craftsman was told what the customer wants first. Mass manufacturing and make to stock is a creation of the 20th century. The Fordian system created mass manufacturing. Henry Ford made a very famous statement: you can have any car you like as far as the color is black. The Ford Model T was basically one car for the entire world. Well, that model has turned full circle. It's turning full circle. Okay, the world of make to stock, the world of mass economies of scale, the world of mass supply chain management is being appended as we speak. We see product personalization. We see customers buying behavior coming from competition. When customers want something, they basically say that this is what we are looking for. The personalization of distribution. If I take a look at distribution 20 years ago, not even that far back, right? 20 years ago, large containers carrying products in bulk, carrying raw materials in bulk across the world. So distribution was entire chains of distribution were based on the concept of hub and spoke, where hubs would exchange big quantities of finished goods, raw materials, work in progress inventories. And then hub to spoke, you would have kind of decentralized distribution to individuals. Well, with e-commerce, the trouble is that that entire concept has been upended because, first of all, distribution has to be at the package level. It's no longer at the container. The need for economies of scale is still as strong as it was because you cannot really ship a package on a ship. The package needs to be kept in a container for security, for safety, for hygiene. This makes for a very different world in terms of supply chain management. Going beyond lean, let's take a look at fast fashion because fast fashion was basically a concept that upended the apparel sector for the last 3 decades. I mean, before Zara came in, you basically had this concept of first, of course, tailored clothes for many years, and then this notion of ready to wear. And then fast fashion basically came and said that let's look at what customers are buying and make more of that. Well, we are going a bit back to tailoring. I take this example from this website, Pick a Shirt. Okay, it doesn't have to be unique to Pick a Shirt. There are at least 200 companies that I can search for. I know at least 5 or 6 myself. Okay, that have exactly this model. The concept is, I'll give you a choice of something like 100 fabrics. I'll give you a choice of collar designs. I'll give you a choice of button designs. I'll give you a choice of fit. I'll give you a choice of sleeve designs, pocket, front placket, blah, 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 blah. And then I will tailor make a shirt for you. Not mass customization, mass personalization. There are differences. In mass customization, I still mass produce, but then I sort of produce differentiated products. In personalization, I actually move to make to order. So the make to order world where I use economies of scale in terms of fabric, I use economies of scale in terms of fixed designs. But I first take your order and then ship to you. That makes the move to personalization. Personalization goes beyond customization. Okay. Customization is still make to stock, personalization is make to order. I see this upending the world. I see this example, this particular philosophy upending the world of fast fashion. Fast fashion was all about what are customers buying yesterday? Let's make that today. Mass personalization is about what do you want? And I'll make it for you right now. Going beyond the concept of mass personalization, one of the biggest trends in supply chain management is the need for ecosystems to evolve with each other. If I take a look at the Apple iPhone 3, the most successful product in history at that point of time, by the way, the iPhone 3 had the largest revenues of any single product until that point of time. What did the iPhone 3 bring to the smartphone world that did not exist? There were smartphones before. BlackBerry was the market leader. There were touch phones before. You had Palm, you had Trio who had touch phones in the past. So it was not the touch phone. It was not the concept of the better interface, the aesthetics, and all that. They are useful, but they are overhyped. The biggest concept was the app ecosystem. Apple had a focus on simplicity always. If you take a look at Apple, it was always about trying to make computing available to the masses, trying to make large sets of apps available to the masses. From the time of Macintosh, I mean, you basically had the Macintosh reconfiguring the world of personal computers because with the IBM PC, you needed to know MS-DOS, you needed to know Microsoft disk operating systems, you needed to know some kind of rudimentary software to be able to operate a computer. With the Macintosh, your grandmother and my grandmother could operate a computer. That was the difference in terms of the Apple philosophy, the simplicity, the ease of use, the aesthetics, the ergonomics. To that, Apple actually added one more property to their repertoire, the concept of the ecosystem. The notion that I will make a simple base product, I will create an app store. And using this app store, I will be able to get lots of other developers who can develop apps. You can pick and choose your apps. You can increase the functionality, but I will not create that functionality for you. I will create a very simple, basic functionality, and then you choose the functionality that you want from the ecosystem. That concept of using the ecosystem is something that Apple had not done in the past. Apple lost out to IBM in the PC wars because IBM worked with Microsoft and Intel much better than Apple worked with its partners. So this notion of mass personalization and ecosystems developing with each other, has been around for some time, but is getting even stronger today. That's another trend in the notion of mass personalization. And to me, the mother of all disruptions of the supply chain that's going to hit us in the next 15, 20 years. I cannot put a date on it, but I can definitely say that 3D printing will one day completely change the world of supply chain management. As I said in the beginning of the session, the world of supply chain management today is all about the concept of mass production, mass distribution. You produce in low cost countries. The top companies like Apple, like Samsung, in the electronic sector, the top automotive manufacturers, take any product at scale, they all produce in countries where the cost of manufacturing is lower. In China, India, Thailand, Vietnam, ASEAN, Latin America, Africa, not yet, but Africa will be a manufacturing center 20, 30 years later. Okay. The concept has always been that we will basically have products that are mass produced. Then they are mass distributed using the hub and spoke network. And then from that distribution center where they are sent in bulk, you break bulk as a supply chain designer, you break bulk by sending it out to smaller retail stores and so on. That's the concept of supply chain as we've known it for the last 100 odd years. With 3D printing, things will be same and things will be different. What will be similar? I will still have the need for mass distribution, but not mass distribution of finished goods. I will have the need to mass distribute raw materials. When I want to buy a pair of shoes, I will no longer buy a pair of shoes that's made in Indonesia, China, Vietnam, India, Thailand, or wherever. I will go to my local 3D printer and say that here's a design that I got off the internet. This design was given to me by Adidas. I bought this design for 20 bucks from Adidas. Now you print this design for me. And my local 3D printer will basically print that design for me on the site. I don't think we'll get to the point where each house will have a 3D printer because the amount of materials that you need in manufacturing is just too high. But you will have local 3D printers which will basically act as the stores of today. They will make with materials, raw materials that they have, items that you are looking for. In terms of durable goods, of course, all product categories does not do not fit. Food and beverage does not fit this distribution yet. Who knows? I mean, if you create synthetic food items, you might get to that point. But definitely, in terms of many product categories, you will see 3D printing completely disrupting the supply chain. 3D printing basically requiring the mass distribution of raw materials, and the finished goods production will be personalized to the tastes of the customer. When do I expect to see this? Well, currently the cost differential between 3D printing and traditional manufacturing is quite high. I mean, you have so many examples. Almost all toothbrushes, implants today in developed countries are made by 3D printing. We've come a long way in terms of 3D printing already. So anything that's medically connected, anything that's sort of very important for the customer, the cost of healthcare is very high. So, having a 3D printed stent, if the stent is for an elective surgery, having a 3D printed stent is not that expensive. A 3D printed stent costs about $250. A regular stent costs about 100. So it depends on the stent, of course. Some stents are much more high end. But in medical care, we've seen this move to 3D printing quite early. When the cost differential comes down to about 25 to 30% higher, when 3D printing costs are about 25 to 30% higher compared to mass production of goods, at that stage, we will see the move from mass production to 3D printing. What timeline do we expect? That will be different in different product categories, as I said. If I take a look at mission critical items, today shipping companies for spare parts, many of them carry the larger ships, carry 3D printers. So, what do we really sort of envisage in terms of the diffusion of this? Hard to say. It will be slow in the beginning, like all diffusions in the past. But eventually, somewhere in the next century, supply chain management will be disrupted by additive manufacturing, 3D printing. Which moves me to this notion of digitalization because 3D printing is a very well known example of digitalization. I have other examples of digitalization like data analytics, robotics, 3D visualization, IoT. All of you heard of these ad nauseum, right? So obviously, yes, in the near future, many of these are looking to disrupt the supply chain. Probably the one that's done the most change already is data analytics. AI machine learning are tools that are elements of data analytics for processing information efficiently. Being able to predict better compared to regular systems. What is the difference between artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning algorithms, and expert systems or statistical regression that we had in the past? The main difference is that for expert systems, for statistical regression, you had to program the computer to be able to do the prediction based on certain data gathering. The difference is that that set of rules that used to govern expert systems and regression does not have to be inputted into these algorithms. These algorithms still need training, by the way. They still need large data sets to be able to impute relationships, but they do their own learning. They use different algorithms, they do their own best fits, and they find out which is the best fit for prediction, which is the best fit for description, and so on. So the difference between AI and machine learning is that machine learning and these new techniques versus the previous techniques is that they are adaptive in nature. They do their own learning. In the past, you would need to learn and you would need to input those rules into the computer. Nowadays, these systems they do their own learning. So they're adaptive algorithms, which is different from what you have in the past. So with AI-based predictions, one big difference that we see statistically, empirically on the ground is that the fit is much better. Why is the fit better? The fit is better because for every data that they add, they train themselves to sort of correct errors. So then you don't need to say that this has to be a sinusoidal increasing curve. The algorithm will figure that part out itself. So you don't need to give the structure of the prediction model. The algorithm will use multiple models, correct errors with the training, and do its own prediction. That is why AI based predictions are better. It's not rocket science. It's basically the fact that these adaptive algorithms are able to generate their own error correcting mechanisms. How is this changing? It's changing because in the past, data trends were sort of analyzed literally annually, biannually. If I take a look at production and product mixes, many of you have realized this. I mean, I see a lot of the people that I know here are very senior in terms of industry expertise. You should know this that any production system, any distribution system is optimized for a certain product mix. I myself did a consulting project many, many moons ago for a company called Majestic Fireplaces. This company primarily had wood fireplaces that were being installed, and its production and distribution systems were optimized for wood fireplaces. And then over time, the product mix changed from wood fireplaces to electric and gas fireplaces. Gas fireplaces became much more popular than wood fired fireplaces. The only problem was that the production and distribution systems were not being optimized on a daily basis. So 2 years later, they did an analysis and said, "Oh my God, we are really inefficient because what we are doing is optimized for wood-fired fireplaces, and today we make many more gas-fired fireplaces than wood-fired fireplaces." So then they had to revisit the entire production layout, the machine layout. I mean, most of the machines were already there. They had to sort of rebalance the allocation. In some cases, get some new capacity. In some cases, change the way the distribution and the servicing was done, because gas fireplaces need a different set of skills for the installation. So all those changes had to be made. With AI, you can actually get these trends on an automated basis. The trend analyses that you used to do in the past yourself, you can actually get these in terms of regular outputs. AI does not need you to sort of look for a trend. It can give you information. And then what you have to do is you have to basically say that this is what I intend to do. This is the information that I need. So there's a lot of data mining, there's a lot of data analytics that you can get without even having to look for it with these techniques. Some examples of how these AI data analytic techniques are actually changing supply chain management. It's always useful to know, what sort of business decisions are being impacted. So here I have two companies, okay, fairly large companies involved in, I wouldn't say big companies at the level of FedEx, okay, but suppliers of FedEx, subsidiary, no, partners of FedEx, local partners, who had in a certain region in the US, they basically had two sets of companies with two sets of distribution facilities. Okay, so these are basically pickup points, distribution points, and so on, blue and red, blue for one firm, red for the other. Then these companies said that, look, our business is getting more and more scale oriented. Let's merge. So they decided to merge. And when they were merging, they said that, look, there are more blue dots to the right, there are more red dots to the left. What we can do is, rather than trying to keep all our centers, what we can do is we can sort of say that in some parts you keep your centers, some parts we keep our centers, and then we merge the two. So then when you're looking at M&A decisions, even before you actually sort of make the decision to merge, what you can do is look at the impact of cost and so on. And if you make these decisions, how would the distribution facilities change? How would the fixed costs reduce and so on? What would be the benefits of the merger? You can quantify all those much better using these kinds of techniques, because these techniques are self-adaptive. They will try out different configurations. In the past, what you would need to do is change manually. Suppose I have these, what is the impact? Suppose I have these distribution centers, what is the impact? What these algorithms like AI and machine learning, the adaptive algorithms do, is they look at different configurations and say this is the best configuration. In terms of maintenance, trend analyses have been used to say that, look, this machine typically starts giving defectives after about 4 hours of operation. So we need to do preventive maintenance. We need to change the cutting tool, let's say about 3 hours, 50 minutes after being operated. So these are things that AI has been useful in terms of maintenance. In terms of logistics, quite frankly, I think that we always look to the West for advancements in logistics. But between Alibaba, JD.com, Yohodian, all these big distribution companies in China, we are seeing that at least in terms of logistical disruptions, most of these new ideas are coming from China. China is a logistics partner of Alibaba. And what they have designed is a five-layered platform of logistics where you don't even know, okay, when a package has to go from Shanghai to Dalian, okay, what they will do is they will say, okay, at this particular layer, I need to move the package closer from Shanghai to Dalian. In the past, what they would look at is, when is the first available truck with capacity going from Shanghai to Dalian? They no longer do that. They say that between Shanghai to Dalian, which is an intermediate city. So which company will take this package from us? Okay. And then dynamically they send the package one step closer to Dalian with every trip. With a dense enough network across their five interconnected layers, with this dynamic routing system, they have been able to bring down their distribution times. They have been able to get much more economies of scale because with dynamic routing, okay, what we see is more or less with some kind of initial transition period, the trucking companies work out their flows, reallocate flows where there is more packages to be picked up. So there is some kind of Uber-like search mechanism equaling of capacity. Dynamic routing helps trucking companies dynamically adjust capacity on a weekly basis and gives more optimal results compared to planned routing. Again, because when you have very dynamic changes, you need for equilibria to be formed by systems internally. It's very hard for you to plan equilibria because you don't know the product mix going forward in terms of time. So this kind of dynamic routing, which truck will pick this up and take it one step closer? You don't have to go all the way to the destination. This has been a game changer in the world of logistics. A lot of Western logistics companies are picking up these ideas from China. So, in terms of logistics, routing, and so on, I think China is leading the way because of the challenges. Jack Ma was asked this question once: why does Alibaba enjoy so much of an advantage in retail in China versus Amazon does not have that market share in the US? And Jack Ma's reply was, Amazon fights Walmart and Target and these big box retailers. In China, when we came in, you only had the sort of small players. You did not really have a structured supply chain. For me, the payment mechanisms were more important. In terms of getting the customers, that was not the issue. It was the payment mechanisms. And that's why I started my Alipay model. And of course, Alipay eventually became Ant Financial. If the idiot had only kept his mouth shut, the government wouldn't have slapped him, and Ant Financial would have been the fourth largest financial institution in China last year. Okay, within 2 years, it would be fighting for the top position. So a lot of these innovations are actually intertwined between services and supply chains. This you've heard ad nauseum. Robotics has been around for some time. It will happen. Okay, I think that the hype has preceded the reality by a long time. You will have drones and autonomous vehicles one day disrupting last mile delivery. You will have robots disrupting retail. You will have robots disrupting distribution. So, in terms of the second trend, okay, you will see that distribution will be upended by robotics. Processing in terms of planning will be disrupted by AI machine learning. Will happen, happening already. This notion of resilience is the third trend that I think you've heard a lot about. Okay, so resilience I won't spend so much time over. But to my mind, the one thing that's been missing is the visibility. Most firms track their finished goods. They don't track their raw materials. They don't track their work in progress. If I take a look at most firms' investments today in cloud-based GPS and RFID or whatever at the pallet level, it's almost completely in tracking what did I send to my customer, not what is inbound. That resilience need is something that you cannot depend on to your suppliers. Of course, your suppliers, what your suppliers send you is their finished good. So ideally, they will be tracking and tracing that, right? But as you go down the supply chain, the smaller the supplier gets, obviously, the lower the investment in track and trace. So at least for the larger organizations, they need to be cognizant of the fact that track and trace in the front end of the supply chain is missing, and the back end is very strong. If I take a look at the pandemic, the biggest impact of the pandemic has been the ubiquity of the pandemic. See, things like dual sourcing don't work during the pandemic. In the past, you would have suppliers, one in Japan, one in Malaysia, one in Korea. If the Japanese supplier cannot supply, then you switch to the Korean, then you switch to the Malaysian, blah blah blah. Dual sourcing didn't work during the pandemic because every country got affected eventually. McKinsey did this study that says that In terms of the F&B sector, in the monthly restaurant sales, there will be some kind of hockey stick effect. If the virus is contained completely, you have a quick rebound. In that case, you will go according to the blue line. But if you have the virus recurrence, which is what the data is saying, this is going to be a long drawn out affair, it won't be a quick finish. In that case, you will have a long drawn hockey stick effect where we cannot predict when the eventual outcome will be contained. In terms of the overall impact on the F&B sector from the pandemic, they basically used multiple proxies like the SARS crisis, like the bird flu crisis, and so on. I've put the reference below here. But the change in terms of losses for the F&B sector, specifically restaurant sales, will be salient based on the black figures because the black figures refer to virus recurrence. Virus recurrence is the scenario that we are seeing in 2021. Now, we've talked about the hockey stick effect. Any kind of disruption leads to some kind of breakdown in performance. And there is a hockey stick impact in terms of the long term impact of that particular cause. The last trend that I will talk about is this move towards servitization. Let's say in the software sector, just 10 years ago, you had Salesforce, which was a big proponent of software as a service. But all the other players were going by their current models. Microsoft did not adopt the software as a service model up until recently, 10 years ago. Apart from a few outliers, everybody was basically saying that we will still have computers owned by customers. We will distribute softwares to them. Of course, they changed from installing softwares by disks and by CDs. They moved it to installation on the internet and so on to make the installation easier. But the primary mode was still the assets would be owned by the customer. Cloud computing began shifting that model about 10 years ago to the point where cloud computing now is threatening to be the dominant mode of computing. You and I will no longer need a computer. All we will need is a device to be able to access the internet. All our data will be kept on the internet. We will not have Word on our computers. Word will be available on the internet. I just click on a document in my cloud service and I edit it using the Word application in the cloud. Microsoft has adopted the cloud for its Office. Azure is now one of the top cloud providers in the world. Microsoft has come up with a CRM solution that's competing with Salesforce. So now the behemoth, the biggest of them all, has adopted the as a service model, the model of cloud computing. What is the difference between owning a product and using it as a service? Well, the problem of owning a product is when I own a car, the car basically I drive it to the office, I drive it back. For about 30 minutes a day, I use the car. The car really has a life of, I mean, useful life in the day of 24 hours, out of which I only use it for 30 minutes. Suppose I move to a shared economy where 10 of us jointly buy a car. As far as we can make sure that each one of us need to have the car at multiple times during the day. That works all for all of us because then all of us buy a car together. That is the point of car sharing. That is the point of servitization. I don't own the car. I basically use the car only when I have to. This model sort of seems obvious to us today, but I mean, 20 years ago, you didn't really have this concept of car sharing, though you had plane sharing. None of us can afford planes, right? So that's why we need someone to buy the plane and then we sort of pay only for the ride for the plane. So the taxi model is something that the planes used to adopt. So the reduced time between ordering and integration, modularization, open standards, only paying for the functions that are used, decreased complexity, reduced needs for maintenance and service. These are the factors that are forcing companies to look at, move away from selling the product. Pay per use or subscription. These are the two dominant models for products and services tomorrow. The servitization model is changing the world. The servitization model is changing supply chain management. Logistics as a service, warehousing as a service, freight as a service, demand sensing as a service, all these basic models. The difference is that in the past, you did have a model of long term partnering. The long term partnering needed some kind of investments in terms of solutions and so on, in terms of search costs for partners. All that is changing today to becoming a much more opportunistic system. See who is got. So, from short term to long term, back to short term in some extent. This definitely helps because one of the biggest topics for the future is sustainability. I don't know if you saw the UN climate change report, but at least this time, and previously the scientists were warning, and now they are saying that we are at doomsday. They are no longer warning us. They are telling us that go to hell. The world is going to destroy itself. We are at the tipping point already. I don't know if people will take that seriously, but when you change the ownership of the product from the customer to the manufacturer, the customer just uses the product as and when he or she needs it. The manufacturer owns the product. You have the advantage that the manufacturer can reuse the product in subsequent generations. The manufacturer can maintain the product. You need less products. Imagine at one point of time when I was growing up, my dad and I used to share our shirts. So, sharing basically reduces the need for more goods. Right? So, you can have circular economy advantages, sustainability advantages in terms of product use. I see that there are three comments. Let me address these and then I will sort of open up the floor for questions. So, Sayed had a question. You heard me saying that data analytics have disrupted supply chains already. Don't you think that data analytics is pretty much needed to manage supply chain disruption happening due downstream or upstream nodes? In essence, data analytics has not disrupted, supported business to cope with the disruptions. Okay. So that's a question of semantics. I agree with you that, when you say disruption, disruption only works for those who were blindsided by it, did not see it coming. For those who actually saw the disruption coming and use that particular technology, it becomes an enabler. So it's a question of semantics. I agree with you fully that data analytics has replaced a lot of need for judgment that we had in the past. The role of the supply chain manager is to use that judgment in combination with the data analytics to come up with more informed models. At the end, the problem with data analytics automation is that the data analytics at the end can only be as good as the training factors. That initiative, that prediction of this will be an issue in the future if I don't look at it now. We haven't come to the Skynet era of supply chain management yet, where computers can predict problems in the future and look for solutions for them now, like we do as humans. So I think that there will still be a need for a mixed interface between humans and data analytics, algorithms, hardware, and so on. I agree with you that those companies that have seen this coming, have used them better, are indeed reaping the benefits of it. So I mean, that's completely in sync with my own thinking. YSC, the failure of lean versus just in case is the cause of black swans. Do you foresee any better predictive capabilities with all these emerging technologies? Is lean dead going forward? I think that's an excellent question. Okay, YSC, I think that this question is something that I mull about, we talk about this. What is the concept of lean? The concept of lean is no waste. But then the trouble is that when you have a concept of no waste, you need to make sure that the world is predictable, that you don't have black swans, that you don't have black swans. Why is that lack of black swans important? The lack of black swans is very important for a very simple reason. Let's take the pandemic in China in 2020 January. When the pandemic is hitting scale in China at that stage, the world was so damn lucky that we had the Chinese New Year. So a lot of the workers had already left, but they built up a huge buffer of inventories for Chinese New Year, so that when the pandemic hit, we managed to get to a point where we had everybody. Okay, we managed to get to a point where we had everybody ready with inventory. To some extent, fat is good. To answer your question, YSC, is lean dead going forward? The answer is no. Lean is a strong concept, lean is a robust concept. What we will see is a mixed model where at the finished goods level, you will work with higher target inventories than you had in the past because of the need for resilience. At the component level, you will take a look at mission critical components versus those components that are not so important. For mission critical components, you will have very high safety levels. Okay, you will pretty much have 3 sigma level, 99% confidence interval safety levels. For non-mission critical items that can be sourced easily from local suppliers and so on, you will not have that same kind of approach. So for those, you will go lean. Okay, but for mission critical components, you will go high. One of the things that I see being done by most governments, including Singapore, Singapore has the 30 by 30 initiative. 30% of Singapore's food and beverage consumption to be met by local production by 2030. Okay. So that's the concept of 30 by 30 in Singapore. This move towards localization is basically a move to reducing lead times so that just in case we have these black swan events, at least for basic elements, we have these things in control. So the concept of lean still exists. It's still a strong concept, but it will be in sort of tandem with the notion of localization, with the need for higher inventories for mission critical items. So how to create these mission critical items? There are criticality frequency maps. Okay, so on one axis you have how difficult is this component to source elsewhere, and if this component is not available, in that case, how easy is it to assemble your product? And then based on that, you basically see the position of the component, and then you decide on the inventory level. So I think that there, I mean, you can always do it for a small number of components mentally, but as the number of components gets larger, you need these kinds of maps and systems. Okay. So philosophically, I don't think that lean is dead. I think that people realize that being thin is good, but when you're really thin, when you have a famine or a drought, if you don't have any body fat, you will die. So you have to be like this guy called Shantanu, who's moderately fat. You should not be super fat, but you should have some excess fat so that just in case you will be able to use that. Any other questions, please? Can I open the floor for all questions from everybody? Okay. So, Richard, I agree with you that driverless and piloting technologies will become a dominant force in the coming decade, not likely. Again, this is just, I make predictions on the stock market and I'm wrong most of the time. So, predictions in terms of time and so on are hard to make, and my success record is not great. But I think that these technologies already exist, Richard. To me, the bigger issue is the testing and the commercialization, the regulatory environment. It will take much more time. You know, we make accidents every day, but having one driverless car having an accident makes the news to the point, oh, the machines can take over. There's the issue of security, there's the issue of hacking. With everything in terms of the general fear of automating something that you cannot control, that could cause a lot of impact if misused. I see these becoming a dominant force, but over a longer time frame, simply because the technology, while it exists today, the acceptance of that for commercial purposes will be longer in coming, but it will happen. Okay, so it's a question of when, not if. Okay, but that when will be a little later. Can the ability to implement technology, data analytics, AI is limited by the digitalization of the ecosystems players, including SMEs, which constitute a large part of the ecosystem. When do you expect this to catch up? Brilliant. Ken, very pertinent question. I work with Spring, I work with IE, I work with Enterprise Singapore in terms of this question. Enterprise Singapore, IE, Spring, they have done a lot of efforts to work with SMEs. Okay, this notion of everything as a service is very useful for SMEs, right? Because SMEs always say that they don't have the funds to invest in terms of these technologies. And what the government agencies have been telling them is that, if you don't have the funds, it's okay. Just change the model from capex to opex. Most of you think that adopting any new technology involves a huge capital outlay, capex. But when you move to an as a service model, you can basically pay for ERP systems via monthly fees by just choosing the as a service model, right? In which case you can convert that capex to opex. So I agree fully with you, Ken, that SMEs need to catch up. With SMEs, I fully understand their fear. Their fear is that suppose we make all these investments, what is the business case? What do we see in terms of ROI? So the government agencies, different organizations are working with SMEs as we speak to take a look at ROI to make them understand how digitalization helps in terms of keeping their business in the future. Because if they don't have these, maybe they will just lose their business. Okay? So this dialogue is something that I've been a part of that I think the government agencies are very aware of, and they are doing this. When to catch up, hard to say. Okay. So what's your recommendation in convincing the business of the balance between resilience versus efficiency? Again, YSC, that's a very hard question to answer because when you're making profits, you never think of disruption. When did the airlines really start investing in hedging fuel? The airlines really began investing in hedging fuel when the cost of oil per barrel began hitting 117, 118, 120 around 2014 to 15. And then just last 2 years ago or last year with the pandemic, you got a huge shock where the price of oil dropped to negative. If I'm not mistaken, it dropped to negative $12 per barrel. Okay. So at that point of time, all these companies were saying, oh my God, I've bought head supplies of oil at 140, 130. Should I just stop it? So everybody reacts to what they have seen yesterday. When oil prices went very high, Southwest and all these airlines that used to hedge, they are very, very happy. Look, we hedged. And then those airlines that did not hedge, in 2019, they were, yay, we bought all the oil supply in the world and got money for it. We were paid for it because oil prices were negative. Right? So the convincing part between resilience versus efficiency typically is done using the hedged model at the larger companies. At Unilever, that model is known as the value at risk model. So what they will do is they will tolerate a certain degree of variability, but the value at risk should be within something like 80% confidence interval of the worst case. So that model, it's used by larger firms. For smaller firms, they always have to understand that while they're making profits, okay, if and when things go bad, they can go bankrupt, okay, in a really bad environment. So the need for resilience is there to ensure continuity. The need for business continuity planning is needed for just plain survival. Syed, what technology disruptors deserve immediate attention? Syed, if I ask this question of most people who work in payments in the developing countries, blockchain is the easiest answer because with blockchain you get to standardization more easily, you get to security more easily, and so on. Okay, so my understanding is that it really depends on the industry that you're in. If you're in manufacturing, it will be additive manufacturing. If you're in distribution, it'll be robotics. So I would say that the technology disruptors, they it's the easy answer. It depends is the easy answer. In this case, it's an honest answer. It's hard to sort of give one unique answer. to this particular question, because all these technologies, they impact different parts. AI, machine learning, deep learning, they affect data processing everywhere. To me, if I had to pick something that sort of makes things evident in terms of supply chain management and people, I would say that it's IoT across industries, because in Internet of Things is a sensing technology. With the sensing technology, you can basically make sure that humans do more value adding activities and more sort of checking activities like checking temperature, checking readings, and so. Oicom, what is the trend for banking settlements transactions? Localize in a local wallet or payment gateway, but in a globalized transaction, have settlements been catching up for their current client needs? Trap capital is currently high. Okay, so here you fully, I'll take this as the last question, okay, because we are over time. Many of us need to leave. Okay, Oicom, I think that in terms of payments for transactions, just like we had SWIFT, which was sort of something that was standardized for international exchanges, I think we will have a globalized standard soon. I think that the globalized model, okay, is the way that the world will eventually work. Because when you have payment standards across multiple countries, I have a wallet here. When I used to go to China, I used to use a different wallet. In each country, I need a different wallet. So I think that there will be a need for some kind of global standard where, of course, individual banks operate their own wallets, but there is some degree of interoperability. So DBS will basically say that when you go to China, instead of Payla, you can use the WeChat, because we have a model with WeChat where our money can be automatically converted to Chinese currency and be used in WeChat. So we basically have these interconnections. To me, those interconnected models will be the future. It won't be one bank taking over the entire world, specifically because regulators and governments will say that I don't want my financial system being dominated by an MNC. I want to make sure that there is competition. So, what I see is some kind of interoperable network of payments across multiple banks coming up as a solution, like you currently have in these phone networks, mobile phone networks. Okay, you don't have one company that's dominating, but you basically have these interoperable systems. I see the same for payments as well. Thank you so much. Vihong is really harassing me to quit because many of you have to go. It's been a pleasure seeing all of you. I hope to see more of you in the program. Thanks.